On this edition of ITG, it's another ranked opportunity for the Mountaineers at home in prime time as the Kansas State Wildcats roll into town on homecoming weekend. We'll talk about that game from all angles. Mountaineers, Wildcats, how it plays out, any predictions, our weekly pick'em, all of that and more on this edition of In the Gun.
You are now watching Believe.
ITG.
With Wes, Owen, and Jed.
I've got the best teammates in the business here, all right?
No way!
They both played the game. They both know the game. Owen is the runaway beer truck known for having some fun.
Owen Schmidt, you have a podcast, In the Gun.
Owen Schmidt, like a runaway beer truck down the sidelines.
Jed is the signal caller who is the X's and O's and the brainiac.
First of all, Jed's research pretty impressive.
So we've combined those two skill sets.
Skills I've acquired over a very long career.
You are In the Gun.
Once you enter this family, there's no getting out.
In the Gun, episode 201 of your new favorite WVU football podcast. I am Wes Schuler with the best teammates in the business. We got the signal caller, Jed Drenning. We may be joined by the beer truck, Owen Schmidt. We are not entirely sure. He's got one of those busy nights at work. First he was in, then he needs some more time. We're going to wait and see here. We are hopeful that we will get Big O in here on this edition of ITG. But as always, we are brought to you in part by our friends at Bet Online, the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything sports betting. I can't talk. I love Bet Online so much. Every stat, matchup breakdown, live odds and spreads to bet on during games. It's all at Bet Online. The largest catalog of odds on everything from football. You got baseball playoffs. The NHL and the NBA are back. And yes, they even have election props as well, too. So when the games are over, or when the election's over, you could still head to their online casino, get in on a game of blackjack, poker, or unwind with one of over 150 slot games. It's all at the website today. Get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. Bet Online. The game starts here. And Jed, we start with, I believe, before the season began, we made a plug for Garnett Hollis Jr. and what he was trying to do to raise some money for a cancer victim from West Virginia. I know you have an update on that, and once again, we wanted to kind of just follow up on that story and everything that was going on.
We want to do that. We're trying to help a good man, Garnett Hollis, do a good thing. We're Maddox Potter, a teen from West Virginia battling stage 4 cancer. Garnett Hollis has put this initiative together based on his performances, and we retweeted it at In the Gun Podcast on Twitter, on X. So you can make it easy for you guys just to go check out our timeline, and you'll see Garnett's tweet where he recently retweeted it as the fundraiser continues. They're trying to reach a goal of $10,000 for Maddox Potter. So whatever you can do to pitch in, we're going to include the link. Skylar is in the description of the show to help Maddox out and to help Garnett's initiative here. And in addition to that, you can go to our Twitter timeline and check it out there. So that's point number one. That's a really cool thing. I told Garnett before the opener even, I saw him in the locker room before the Penn State game, and I said, that's a really cool thing you're doing for that kid. Awesome. So awesome. Let's all, spread the word and do what you can do to help out there. And then point number two, Wes, on a lighter note, friend of the show, Philip Bowen, West Virginia's own. If you want to get to the K-State game early at 5:30, the east side of Milan Puskar Stadium between the light blue and the teal parking lots, Philip Bowen will be performing in a WVU football kickoff concert presented by Rebuilders Commercial Restoration. So if you haven't been to a Philip Bowen live performance, trust me, you want to. Chrissy and I had the good fortune of doing that when he was in Clarksburg. It's a heck of a show. Philip's always entertaining. He's one of us. He loves to stay and hang out and sign everything and tell stories and swap stories. He will stay all the live long day with any fan who wants to talk to him and engage him about anything. He's just a man absolutely of the people. So again, Philip is going to be doing that. I'll get a chance to see him. It's pretty cool on the sidelines at some point, hopefully before the game. So he's going to be hovering around down there. He texted and told me as well. So if you get a chance to get to Phillips Performance, it's going to be 5:30. Kickoff, of course, against Kansas State is 7:30 Saturday night. So you can have a heck of an evening. You talk about a great entertainment filled evening. Go check out Philip Bowen and then see West Virginia in action against a ranked Kansas State football team. Makes for a pretty good evening between the light blue and the teal parking lots. Philip Bowen at Milan Puskar Stadium.
Yeah, it's right behind where the student section entrance is. It's right across the street from that new parking garage, the WVU Medicine parking garage that was built a couple years ago. You can't miss it. Same place where they had Big Noon Kickoff and MGK right earlier in the year. Big shout out
Pretty
to
cool
our
what
buddy.
he said, Wes.
I saw his
He
tweet.
put
I
a
was just
tweet
going to
out.
say,
Yeah,
yep,
you want
I
to
was
read the
just gonna
tweet?
say,
Do you have it out? I have it out.
I
Here,
can. Do you have it out there? Go ahead. I was going to say
have it
I
out.
don't.
He put a tweet out when he was plugging this. And if you know Philip Bowen, this just rings so true. Yeah, I got to meet his brother and his parents, and they're just such awesome people. If you would have told me 5 years ago, back when I was duct taping old lamps to my basement beams for lighting and using my iPhone headphones for a studio mic, everything is possible until it's done. See you at the game. He's just a heck of a story. Again, we had him on the show. He was such a massive hit on America's Got Talent. He took the house down with that. But if you get an opportunity, I'm telling you, go check this show out before the game. It will be well worth it.
I loved that tweet from him because don't tell him I said this. All right. That's how I feel about doing a podcast with a beer truck. I mean, you know what I mean?
That's
like one of my
right.
favorite football players growing up. He brings Pat White and Steve Slayton on the show. I mean, if you would have told me, don't tell Owen I said that. All right. Cause I'll deny it. We'll strike this from the record. Another thank you to our friends at Toothman Ford for being a presenting sponsor of this edition every edition of In the Gun. Big shout out to JR and everybody there at Team Toothman. We all know cars cost less in Grafton. Jed, a trio of shout outs here for you before we go to our first break around campus. Okay, so we do this from time to time when we want an excuse to give some love to somebody other than the football team, because we do have a lot of athletic programs across the university. We just call it around campus briefly. Couple shout outs here. Men's soccer for the second time this season, #1 in the country. Okay, now they lost to Dayton last night, so they'll probably drop down to 4, 5, 6, something like that here. But it's soccer. They play a ton of games. It's obviously really hard to stay undefeated and consistently just win games in that sport. But this is the second time this season they have been ranked #1. Of course, they went to the College Cup, which is like the equivalent of the Final Four last year, the furthest we ever went in program history, continuing that this year. So big shout out to Dan Stratz and everybody there on the men's soccer team. Like I said, bummer that they lost last night to Dayton, and now next week will probably fall back down a couple spots. But this is the second time this year they've been ranked #1. Excited to see how that goes. Marshall's ranked #2. Pitt, I think, is ranked like #6. So there's some potential to be some really fun matchups there down the road as well, too. So big shout out to men's soccer team. Keep kicking some butt. Speaking of soccer, Jed, we've talked about Nikki Izzo Brown here on this show before and just what she's built. Her 400th win as the head coach of the WVU women's soccer program. She started the program, took us D1 all the way back in 1996. The only coach in program history. She has been to Final Fours and national championship games. She has produced Olympians and World Cup players. I mean, she has taken us from a club program to heights unknown. 400 program wins for Nikki Izzo Brown. Big Jed, that's a huge
landmark.
That's a landmark.
That's a landmark. That's a landmark. Any sport that is an achievement of epic proportions. But think of the consistent level of success it takes in soccer to pull that off. I mean, I don't know if there's any name more directly associated with any program in the school, more so than she is. Obviously, she's the name with women's soccer.
Think about that.
She's been she was there at ground zero. Yeah,
been the head coach since '96. Yeah, it's
planted
crazy.
The seeds. Yep.
Planted the seeds. I saw they posted some video this week of, like, I guess the first ever women's soccer game they played at Mountaineer Field. and just seeing those flashbacks to 96 and the outfit that she was wearing and the uniforms and everything back then. And, where now, I mean, just has built legitimately one of the best programs in the country, was just in a national championship game a few years ago. 400 wins, one coach in program history. Pretty stinking cool. And a big shout out to Nikki Izzo Brown. Listen, it's hard to get statues, all right, but she might need one whenever she is done, that's for sure. And then finally, women's hoops, basketball practice getting started this week for the men's and the women's. So big shout out to Darren DeVries as well too, and the men's team as they start a new era in Morgantown. But our women's team
coming up.
Yeah, that's right. Friday night, I believe, right? Yep.
Friday
so
night,
if you're in Morgantown early for the homecoming weekend, you can go get an early look at the basketball boys. But the basketball women, of course, Mark Kellogg, year 2 at the helm. Preseason polls are out, Jed, and they are ranked number 16 in the preseason polls. So big shout out to Mark Kellogg and our top 20 preseason ranked women's basketball team. They've had some really good years these past couple years, and let's keep that rolling.
He's shaping up already, it seems, to be a good hire. And I mean, he had a track record that preceded him, and it seems like he's really starting to build something here as well. And so that's really cool. Yeah, you shared that in the group thread a couple days ago. Appreciate you doing that. But yeah, lots of goings on. Including, as you talked about, a new era in men's basketball starting with the exhibition game. And I know some folks who are pretty pumped to go into that exhibition game and check things out as well. So a lot going on.
Always a lot of moving and shaking. But, of course, it is homecoming weekend. And, of course, football is the straw that stirs the drink. We will discuss Mountaineers and Wildcats. Speaking of top 20 teams, we got one rolling into Morgantown for a primetime game on Saturday night. We'll break it all down for you, get into all of that when we return. You are in the gun.
For nearly 20 years, Fortis has been the nation's leader in providing guaranteed roof performance programs for commercial buildings. Fortis offers roof performance solutions that feature extensive initial and ongoing reconditioning for commercial buildings as an alternative to traditional replacement, with long-term performance guarantees that are backed by global leader Lloyd's of London. Fortis offers a comprehensive range of roof performance management programs that provide financial security, extend the life of our customers' roofs, and make a significant impact on ROI. Fortis is currently improving performance and increasing ROI for customers at more than 4,800 locations, with more than 140 million square feet protected, including many Fortune 500 companies that have turned to Fortis to save money, gain financial certainty, and extend the life of their existing roofs. Fortis has helped customers save more than $520 million in capital roof replacement costs for an average ROI of over 250%. To learn more, visit fortis.us.com. Fortis, roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed.
Nobody supports the blue and gold Mountaineers like Toothman Ford. With over 20 NIL deals and counting, Toothman Ford continues to rally behind our student athletes. And it's time we rally and support the dealer that supports the Mountaineers. Not only does Toothman Ford offer the best prices in the state on pre-owned, their never over MSRP campaign on new Fords guaranteed to save you thousands. Drive with pride all season long, knowing you're supporting the dealer that fuels our Mountaineers. Toothman Ford, where cars cost less, in Grafton and at toothmanford.com.
Back in the gun here as it's time to get you ready for Mountaineers and Wildcats. 7:30 back-to-back primetime games for your Mountaineers. But this one's a little different, Jed. You know why?
What's that?
I'm going to be there, baby. Okay?
That's true.
mean, listen, I didn't want to say it on the recap episode because we had a lot to get into. But obviously the number one reason we did not beat Iowa State in the Coal Rush is because Euler wasn't in attendance. All right.
The other side of the country. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Blame it on Roger Goodell or whoever makes the NFL schedules. Okay. It wasn't my fault. I was literally 2,000 miles away on the other side of the country. But here comes Kansas State from Manhattan. Not quite the other side of the country, but pretty close. And a nationally ranked Kansas State team that's coming off of a big road win last week in Colorado. Hostile environment. Steps into another hostile environment this Saturday night. You know they will be ready for that. Jed, I got a little kind of KSU overview on the offensive side of the football, and then we'll get into some of the player personnel. Does that sound good?
That works great.
All right, well, let's get into first some of just the numbers here, and Jed can speak better to these in a moment, but just some numbers for you to kind of paint the picture of this offense. Total offense, fifth best in the Big 12 to this point. They're averaging over 430 yards per game. That's a pretty big number. And they're doing it primarily on the ground with the second best rushing offense in the conference, eighth best in the country. Jed, we thought the WVU offense that was going for over 220 yards a clip on the ground per game last year was great, and they were. This Kansas State rushing attack is going for over 240 on the ground per game now, which is just insane. Again, that's second best in the conference, number 8 in the country. And in the red zone, they score touchdowns at a very high percentage of the time, very efficiently, 71% of the time. That is the fourth best in the Big 12. Where they maybe aren't the best, or where there's some numbers that you say, okay, this is where we have to have success and find some ways to use this to our advantage. Their passing offense is struggling, under 200 yards a game, $190 a game. That's 14th bottom of the barrel in the Big 12. And then their third down offense is clicking at less than 40% as well, too. 10th best in the Big 12. And you know what? Before, as I said, we get to some coordinator stuff, but give me, I know you've got some nuggets on some of those things that I just touched on there. So let's go there first.
Yeah, in large measure, what they do, Wes, is it's a three-headed monster. You have an athletic quarterback that we'll talk about, and you got two really talented backs with different skill sets. And that leads to these rushing numbers that you were talking about. And in large measure, because they've been so successful on the ground, they haven't had to do a whole lot through the air. So it's not really for lack of effort as much as it is they just haven't needed to, or lack of ability, I mean. So that's really why that passing number, 190 yards a game, doesn't overwhelm you. There's only been a select handful of times this year they've been forced to throw the football. One of them, as we'll discuss, was late last week in that Colorado game, and they really delivered with everything on the line with the pass game when they had to.
Yes, they certainly did. A big passing touchdown at the end of that was a 50-yarder, I think, to take the lead late in that game for Kansas State. Do want to talk about Avery Johnson, of course, here in just a minute. But I mentioned coordinator as well, too. They hired former Utah State and Texas Tech head coach. You'll remember Matt Wells, who was recently the Texas Tech head coach, co-offensive coordinator to coach the quarterbacks and to help Connor Riley with the offense. What is Matt Wells, a guy who's familiar with the conference, obviously? What's he brought to the table for the Wildcats so far?
One of the interesting things about the fit of Matt Wells, think back when he was at Utah State. Who was his most prominent quarterback at Utah State, who's currently the quarterback starting for the Green Bay Packers?
Yes, Jordan Love.
Jordan Love, yes.
Jed, I think he could play. All right. I mean, I think he Jordan Love could play. I didn't want to crown him off of last season in an amazing playoff win over the Cowboys. I'm ready to crown him now. My God, the Packers have done it again. How do they go from Favre to Rodgers to Jordan Love? That's just not fair. Okay, sorry.
Three in a row. But what's interesting about that is when you look at Jordan Love's skill set, who does that kind of remind you of? And Avery Johnson's that type of aspiring player. He's a legitimate dual threat kid. So this Matt Wells hire makes a whole lot of sense. I think he perfectly complements Connor Riley and what Connor Riley has done with this offensive line and this Kansas State offense. But the things and the wrinkles that Matt Wells brings to the table in working with Avery Johnson and Avery Johnson's skill set with a history with a guy like Jordan Love, that's kind of fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it absolutely is. And, Avery Johnson is the homegrown Wichita kid, right? Train don't run out of Wichita, but apparently the five-star recruits do. Big part of the reason why a lot of people thought Will Howard left to go to Ohio State, in part because it was kind of Avery Johnson time in Manhattan. I mean, Jed, he's a stud, man. He's got the body type. He's got the arm. He's got the speed. He's one of those legit dual threats, like not just a scrambler, not just a pocket passer. He can beat you both ways. He's starting to get a little bit comfortable now. Got a start at the end of last season in the bowl game, but has been given the reins this year. And he's dangerous, man. You could see why they were so excited about him and why, when a lot of people were kind of like, oh man, like Will Howard hitting the transfer portal, a lot of Kansas State people said it's okay. We got a nice succession plan here, and they certainly have.
Yeah, they kind of felt like we're good, we're just fine because when they signed him a couple years ago, you could argue he was the most heralded recruit maybe in the history of the
Yeah.
program.
Yeah.
As you talked about, Wichita kid, Kansas kid, so right there on the home front, but legitimately a dual threat, a blistering fast kid, just blistering speed. He's been efficient throwing the football. He got that first start, as you mentioned, Wes, in the bowl game against NC State. But really, his come on the scene moment, if you remember last year, wasn't as a starter. He showed up against Texas Tech and rushed for 5 touchdowns without starting that game. And that's when it really got everybody's attention saying, wow, this kid can make some things happen. So then he starts against Gibby and NC State,
Yep.
plays well, has a great off season, really starts to develop a comfort zone, a comfort level, and he's been efficient throwing the football. Again, they don't do it a lot, but 62%, 11 touchdowns, 5 picks, but running the football, and you really haven't seen him do it to the extent that he truly can. A little over 300 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns. But when he tucks it to go west, here are a couple of things that really scare you. 43% of the time he runs the football, it's for a first down. And if
Yeah.
that's not scary enough, here's one that'll scare you. He has the most scramble yards in the red zone in all of Power Four football. So he likes to tuck it in the scoring area and take off. And boy, I'm watching tape. And that's one of the things that made me look up and check into those metrics. I'm like, so many times he doesn't like what he sees. He just takes off, 18-yard touchdown, 12-yard touchdown. It gets really scary. And we'll talk about some of the packages and concepts that you use to make them so dangerous in the red zone. But I think the most alarming part for Mountaineer fans who have to face this kid this week, it really felt like that moment in that environment last week on the road in Boulder, it wasn't his legs, Wes. With a couple minutes left in the game, they fell behind, and he drove them 84 yards in the final minutes of the game with his arm. And I think that developed a tremendous amount of confidence for him. He's a dangerous, dangerous playmaker leading this K-State offense.
He certainly is. And he's going to be a handful on Saturday night. Part of me's kind of excited to see him play, like the football dork in me, but not really at the same time because I'm a little worried about seeing him play as well. Another thank you to our friends at Fortis, our guy Rick Lewis, the best commercial roofing business in the country, baby. For roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed, you got to visit fortis.us.com. Jed, I think we got the beer truck. This is good timing. Getting ready to tee up the running backs here. Let's see if we can.
Yeah, there you go.
Let's see if
There you
let's
go.
see if let's see if Owen's ready here. Oh, I hear myself on the speaker. Big O, you got us?
Yep.
Ha ha ha! There he is. What's happening, cuz?
Oh boy.
You are right there,
Settle
Professor
in.
Schmidt.
I am good.
He's UPS'd out. Look at him.
Yep. I've been on the truck all day.
Well, God bless you, man. We'll let you ease into it here. This is good timing. We're just getting ready to talk about some Kansas State running backs. So I'll paint a little picture for you here, and then you and Jed can go back and forth about these guys. DJ Giddens kind of leads the way for them. He's another Kansas guy, much like Avery Johnson, physical runner who has some twitch as well too. Last year went over 1,200 yards, double-digit touchdowns, so he's not new to this. Had some success last year as a sophomore. Now he's a junior. Big Jed yards per carry number and Owen. He's going for well over 7 yards per carry. And then Jed getting this good stat here. Over 100 plus yards in 8 of his last 10 games for DJ Giddens as well too. Guys, this is, man, it's a 4th straight week now that we are talking about. It's like the Big 12 has become the conference of running backs. A really formidable opponent that's going to be toting the rock for the opposition.
Yeah, I mean, if you watched him last week against Colorado, had a heck of a game. Think he's leading the Big 12 right now in rushing as well.
Second,
he's leading second. All right. I mean, big physical kid. All I can say is I watched that Colorado game, and he had a legit presence in it. Had some nice stiffies, had some nice finish plays. Really using that shoulder. Getting those. Those are always the hidden yardage for running backs, in my opinion. Right, guys who know how to fall forward. You don't think it's much, but those 1 to 2, 3 yards. I got a cool story about that. Actually, Coach McGee had and I think it was about Avon, and he was going for, just talking about his yardage, and he was watching a lot of film, and Avon was kind of like stepping out of bounds or, not really finishing his runs. And he said, look, if we just start lowering the shoulder on those little out plays, right, they might still kick you out of bounds, right? But those are 2 or 3 extra yards. Ended up really, putting a nice total on the end of his last couple of years there. But as far as the running back goes, man, I mean, this kid is an absolute horse. Let's see, 8 of his last 10 games, 100 plus, 100 plus yards. I mean, that's impressive.
Pretty serious. That's pretty serious.
Think about it. He's second in the Big 12, and Owen, I can see why you think he'd lead the Big 12 because he's fourth in the country, right?
Yeah,
he's fourth in the country rushing, 7.3 yards a carry, and a couple of things that you see when you watch tape. It's kind of like Iowa State last week in the sense that it's a lot of 12 personnel. Iowa State liked to throw out of 12 personnel, 1 back, 2 tight ends. K-State likes to run it out of 12 personnel. Matter of fact, Kansas State has more rushing yards out of 12 personnel sets and formations than any team in the Big 12. And Giddens has more rushing yards out of 12 personnel than any back in the Big 12. So they like to pound you with that 2 tight end look, and they do it pretty consistently. They'll play a lot of tight ends, and that's something we're going to discuss here. And Giddens, he got a bite of the apple the last time they were in town 2 years ago. This is a guy that in that blowout win over West Virginia, 78 yards and a touchdown, played well his last time here when he was kind of a younger pup. But now he's really developed into a formidable weapon for this Kansas State offense. It's when you listen to Chris Kleiman talk, he says, look, this offense is basically built around DJ Giddens. He's now arrived. I mean, he spent some time behind Deuce Vaughn and some other great players, but now this is his time. And as Owen was talking about, when you watch him play, I agree, Owen, that Colorado game, he kind of stole the show.
Yeah,
I mean, it was hard not to just notice him jump out. He's a physical, big kid, but the scary thing is he's now twitchy too. I don't know if 2 years ago he was twitchy. He was kind of just brutish, but now it's the full Monty with him.
Yeah, I mean, 6'1", 212, that's a solid running back.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's ideal, I would say.
Yeah.
They also have Dylan Edwards as well, too, Jet. Speaking of Colorado, we've mentioned them a few times because that's who Kansas State played last week. Dylan Edwards played for Colorado last year, so he's a guy who's familiar with the Big 12. Jed, he's a nice kind of change of pace guy, right? One of those speed demons, if you will.
He's a shifty little speed demon is what he is. And here's what you have. We talked about these 3 playmakers that are kind of the tip of the spear of this K-State offense. And what do they have in common? Dylan Edwards, who went off to play for Colorado for Dion, was a huge get in the recruiting process for Dion. That was a huge get for him. This was a highly coveted kid. Well, after 1 year in Colorado, why does he come back to play for K-State? Because he's from Derby, Kansas. So you've got Avery Johnson, Kansas kid. DJ Giddens, Kansas kid. Dylan Edwards, Kansas kid.
They got the Kansas trifecta.
They're pumping out some ball carriers there, Owen. And this dude can run. Can he, Owen?
Yeah. Like you were saying, Jed, I mean, America's the Under Armour America game, fastest man competition with a legit 4.4. I mean, that is serious speed. And you think you know what 4.4 is until you really see it down on the field. It's fast.
Yeah. There's not as many 4.4s as there claim to be. Are there, Owen?
There isn't. I'm telling you right now.
Those don't grow on trees. Yeah.
Is legit speed.
Yeah, that's blistering speed. And they utilize him a lot of different ways, including in the pass game. They'll get a little creative and use him as a receiver and kind of isolate him as a backers and get some mismatches for him. He's a small kid, 5'9", less than 170 pounds, but just he runs like a pinball and a pinball machine. I mean, that's what he looks like. He's tough to bring down. He's a heck of a kick returner. And here's the thing, guys. This shows you, and it speaks to the production of this Kansas State offense in this Kansas State ground game. We talked about them being ranked so high nationally and ranked so high in the Big 12 as a rushing offense. All three of these guys that we just talked about, they're three rushing leaders. DJ Giddens averages 7.3 yards a carry. Dylan Edwards, 6.2. Avery Johnson, 6 yards a carry. All three of them rank in the top 10 in the Big 12 in yards per carry. That is production with a capital P.
Yeah, that's remarkable.
And you better slow that down and try and control it first and foremost before you even get into the assets and weapons we're going to talk about on the perimeter.
Yeah, having a solid ground game. I mean, really, that's the building blocks of any great offense. But if you watched any of that game last week against Colorado, they're absolutely electric on the ground, man. I mean, and it's it was interesting watching that game because Colorado kind of came back. And I'm talking specifically really right at the end. Colorado comes back, ends up putting the score in and giving Avery, the ball with the last couple minutes of the game, and seeing his poise and coming down to the last minute and ended up putting that in. Absolutely phenomenal. These guys are obviously a massive threat. This is going to be a tough game this week, trying to keep those guys contained.
Yeah, sure is. I mean, there's no doubt. And you know what, Jed, and what's been impressive too, right, is they're running the ball so well behind an offensive line that lost a lot last year, right? I think 4 starters, a couple of those guys in the NFL. That makes it even more, because I think everyone thought they'd have some playmakers, but the offensive line was a question mark, right? But all of a sudden, the offensive line looks pretty solid as well too. It's a formidable offense. It really is.
It is, and they've done a nice job of piecing that offensive line together. You're talking about some FCS level transfers that were really standout kids. And again, Chris Kleiman knows that level of football like nobody. He won all those championships at North Dakota State. He can recognize and pluck talent from that level that can help him in the Big 12. And that's exactly what he's done a couple different times. So you've got some fifth-year seniors that have been through their program and they understand it. You've got some former walk-ons that have really matured for them, and you've got some transfers. And what they've done is they've found a group of 5 kids who have really gelled well together to pave the road for that ground game that we're talking about. And then, guys, let's hit some of the weapons on the perimeter.
Yeah, absolutely. Wide receiver Jace Brown, Keegan Johnson as well too. But let's start with Jace Brown. Jed, stop me if you've heard this before about their offense, but another young guy who had a solid end of his freshman season last year, who's got a lot of speed to burn.
Averaging over 17 yards a catch, a lot of big plays for him, leads him in receptions with 23, almost 400 yards. Only has 5 catches of 30-plus yards. What I noticed, and it really stood out at moments in that Colorado game, the kid, he's not huge, 5'11", 174 pounds, but he is playing with supreme confidence. I mean, this kid is playing with a very, very high level of confidence. I said that earlier about Avery Williams. Absolutely, Jace Brown looks like a very confident football player right now. And think of how meaningful that is as they roll into Morgantown.
Yeah, with all of our problems right now containing the entire field, just one more we have to worry about this week.
Yeah, and he has a partner in crime in Keegan Johnson. Again, they used the portal and used it well. This kid at one point was very highly recruited. He was a former 4-star recruit, ended up at Iowa for a couple years and kind of got lost in the shuffle of that Iowa offense. Made some plays for Iowa, but wasn't happy there, was discontent. So he moved on to Kansas State. And already in a year and a half, he has 37 catches for Kansas State. And he served as a very nice compliment for Kansas State to Jace Brown, on the other side of that offense, and it gives them some weapons, and it really gives them some options and some resources. And one of the interesting things when you look at the tight end room, guys, I don't know if they have one guy that's going to wow you or blow you away. They have four guys they really use. The top two are Garrett Oakley and Braden Lofton, big framed, long guys, as you might expect. But here's a number to be mindful of. Kansas State tight ends have combined for 6 touchdown receptions. That's tied for second most in the country. Now, guys, 5 of those touchdown grabs are in the red zone. And I keep seeing it come up on tape time and time again. And remember this, 3 of Avery Johnson's 11 touchdowns are on wheel routes. And they'll do all kind of different creative things in the red zone with those tight ends. They'll play action, leak those guys in the flat. Remember the old Tim Tebow jump pass when he would show quarterback ISO and then leap up? They run that as well. They find different creative ways to get all 4 of these tight ends just involved enough to hurt you in key situations, especially key situations in the red zone. Now, when you look at Avery Johnson in terms of how long he holds the football, we always talk about this time to throw metric. His average time to throw is 2.1. He kind of holds on to it longer than your average cat. When he's sacked, that number swells up to 3.4 because he's holding on to it a little too long. And he has been sacked 8 times. Guys, Colorado got to him 4 times. Now, they let him up with some pressure, a lot more than we normally do, but they sacked him 4 times and at points that impact him. But here's the scary thing. When he does suck it and he does scramble, he extends the play 5.9 seconds. He has the football in his hands when he scrambles. That's the second highest number in the Big 12. You talk about a strain on your back end and your secondary. That's a true strain. And the last number I'm going to throw at you and get your thoughts on this, we can close out the offense and transition. They've scored at least 28 points or more in 13 of their last 14 games. Jeez. Now, over a 14-game stretch, that's the longest since the late 90s. So it's going to take some points to beat these guys.
Yeah. Let's hope we start out like last week, right? Come down and then just continue that for the rest of the game. That's the only way I really see ourselves kind of keeping up with these guys. And just a quick side note here, Jed, a strong tight end game, especially in the run game. And obviously you said the total touchdowns they've scored this year.
6.
Not only that in the red zone, but having that tight ends in the run game, it's just an extension. And then obviously once you get them out in the pass route, it's hard to cover once things are banging on all cylinders. You know what I mean? You just don't know if they're a run guy or a pass guy. Seems to be a little bit of both and well educated in the verses of playing the position.
Not just creating extra gaps in the run game that you have to be accountable for defensively, but just as you said, Owen, are they going to release the target into the pass game as well? It makes it challenging, especially when they use some pre-snap movement and test your eyes. And yeah, it's a challenge. It's a challenge. They got a good plan. They put together a good plan, a good staff, and they cater to the skill of what they have.
They certainly do, and they are a threat, that's for sure. I got to tell you what, after talking about this offense, I don't know. I don't think I could take the Mountaineers as my Big 12 defense of the week this week. I don't think I could do it, but I'm with Owen. One of the things that you did well against Iowa State was limit their amount of possessions, particularly starting the game with that long, lengthy touchdown drive. You're going to have to do that to Kansas State. You got to limit the amount of times that this offense is going to touch the ball. Before we spin the block to the defensive side, gentlemen, another thank you to our friends at Johnson Equipment for being a presenting sponsor of In the Gun. Now at Johnson Equipment, get 0% financing for 72 months, plus a free loader on select Coyote models in stock. You got to visit Johnson Equipment on Route 33 between Weston and Buchanan. All right, Jed, where does it start for this Wildcat defense?
Well, there's going to be something in common with what we saw against Iowa State. This is another odd stack defense. They installed it a handful of years ago. Defensive coordinator Joe Klanderman, who was on staff all the way back to the North Dakota State days with Chris Kleiman, and they decided they liked what was going on with some of these other odd stack defenses in the Big 12. So they transitioned from an even front to an odd stack a handful of years ago. They've had a lot of success since they did that, allowing just 21 points per game since the transition. Now, right now, it's been kind of a mixed bag for them. Defensively, overall, they're middle of the pack. They're ninth in the conference, but they are number one in the Big 12 against the rush. They're number two in all of FBS against the run. Guys, they're only giving up 72 yards a game and 2.5 yards per carry. They're very stout at the point of attack. Now, as we'll talk about, some of that is because of the pressure-oriented style that they play, as opposed to what Iowa State does, which is more reactionary. Against the pass, they're 15th in the Big 12. That's 268 a game. On the road, which they will be Saturday night, they're dead last in the Big 12 game. We got 293 a game. Now, part of that's the matchups that they have faced on the road in BYU, Colorado, Tulane. But there's some opportunities we'll talk about there. But they are number 131 in the country in completion percentage allowed in these road games. And on the road, they're giving up 76% of the passes attempted against them are completed. But they get after you. They lead the Big 12 in sacks. They're averaging 3 a game. It's interesting when you break down the different looks and how these sacks have come about. Remember, Owen, they're an odd stack defense with a 3-man front, but only 4 of their 18 sacks have come out of a 3-man front, which speaks to what I talked about earlier. They dial up some pressure against you. I'm going to go through some notes that I have from my tape here in a little bit, but in a 4-man pressure, 7 of their 18 sacks. 5-man pressure, 3, and then they lead the Big 12 in sacks from a 6-man pressure look. So they're not afraid to dial up blitz looks despite that 3-man front, probably more than Iowa State would be inclined to do. Iowa State didn't hardly blitz us at all last week. I think it's going to be a different animal this week. We'll get into some of their pressure notes and how ordinarily what they'll do in terms of the blitzes they throw at you, but it's all led by Brendan Mott. He's a former walk-on. He's a 6-year super senior, number 38. When you watch tape, guys, he jumps out. He's tough to block. He's really refined and more polished than I've ever seen him. He's playing really good football. He leads the entire Big 12 in sacks. He was a standout also on the defensive side of the football. One of the reasons that they had that record-setting night against the Colorado ground game that we'll talk about. But your thoughts on that so far, setting the table for the Colorado defense?
Kansas State, you mean?
Oh, yeah. All right. I was just talking about Colorado. Thank you. Kansas State.
No, I mean, we saw the team, we got to get a chance to see some 3-front, obviously, last week. So, we should be able to be somewhat acclimated to just obviously, how they line up. But like you said, Jed, it's all about opening gaps and bringing pressure from unknown places and getting you to ID. It's super critical in a 3-man front to ID who you need to understand what, if you're doing a play side protection, backside protection, and slide protection, whatever, sprint out protection. It's super critical in IDing that Mike backer so that you have some sort of edge, at least at all, on blitz pickup.
Yeah.
Sounds like I was just going to say, sounds like a typical K-State defense, honestly. I don't know, man. It feels like year after year, they have a very similar identity, and they've been stingy lately. I know they gave up 24 points to Colorado, right? But they were real stingy against Oklahoma State, real stingy against Arizona. And I forget who else they had in there too. I mean, they held 2 of those opponents to single digits. So it's another test. And I mean, it's a different kind of test. I mean, as Owen kind of outlined there, different kind of test than Iowa State and what they present defensively last week. But certainly a challenge once again.
Yeah, when you distinguish what they do versus Iowa State. At Iowa State last week, it kind of felt like, okay, here's the brick wall. How do you pick your way through it, right? Now, part of that was, as we discussed, by virtue of the offenses that Iowa State had faced. They dominated inferior offenses, right? And they made the absolute most of it. K-State's probably faced some more explosive offenses so far, and that's part of it. That's a byproduct of some of these numbers we're talking about because they've had some hiccups. Tulane had 491 yards against him. Oklahoma State had 490 yards against him. So they won those games, but it's not like they presented the brick wall in the same sense that Iowa State has defensively, because structurally they're different in what they're trying to do. When you look at some of the things that they've done from a coverage standpoint, first of all, they'll zero blitz you. There are times that they'll do that with no free safety and just man up and outnumber you from a pressure standpoint. They've allowed the most touchdown passes against cover zero of anybody in the Big 12 because they'll sometimes roll the dice. They play a lot of cover 1-0. So that's man across underneath with a free safety Roman as a center fielder. And they no touchdown passes they've allowed when they play cover 1, but they picked off 4 passes. So they do it and they do it very well. And they appropriately dial up those pressure packages when they are in those man coverages. They play 2 deep man under more than anybody in the Big 12. Not a lot, but more than anybody in the Big 12. And sometimes what they'll do is they're an on front defense, but they'll sprinkle in some even front looks. And Owen, I remember when I saw 2 deep man under, there were 2 forms of it. You could face it with an odd front, which meant you had 2 backers, or you could face it with an even front, which meant you had 1 backer. We called it an ace backer. And I always thought, if you're going to run 2 deep man under against me, I love seeing an ace backer look, because now I can attack the pit with multiple routes. You have 1 guy defending that pit. So there's all kind of things I can do, move my back around to make that backer chase. Well, that's sometimes what they'll do is play that 2 deep man under with 1 interior ace backer. So that's something to keep an eye on as well. And the way that they play cover 3, which is a coverage that everybody in America plays, but the way that they play it, they will give you a lot of easy access throws. Guys, opposing offenses have completed 82% of their throws when they see K-State's cover 3. That's the highest cover 3 completion percentage allowed by any P4 defense. So there are different ways, more aggressive, less aggressive, to play a 3 deep zone coverage. And that's kind of the style that they've been playing it. So there are going to be some underneath opportunities, some quick flat opportunities, things of that nature that you can kind of work your way down the field with if you demonstrate the patience when they present it. But it's not the same challenge as last week when you have to show unmitigated patience all night, because they will take chances. And the other thing is they don't make a lot of plays on the football when in the air. We always talk about this passes defended metric, which is the reason Beanie Bishop was an All-American, right? The only team that has fewer passes defended in the Big 12 than West Virginia is K-State. Guys, they have 15 total passes defended, 5 interceptions, and 10 PBUs, 10 pass breakups. That's it. So they have great coverage skills, but don't play the ball in the air a lot. Their starting corners have each only forced 1 incompletion. So that's kind of interesting from a matchup standpoint, too. But last week against Colorado, in part because of this pressure style that they approach the game with, they held Colorado to negative 29 yards rushing. That's the lowest in the nation this year and the 3rd lowest in K-State history by any Kansas State defense. So that happens because they will blitz you and they will take some chances and they'll knock you for some negative yardage plays. And they kept sacking Shedeur Sanders, which hurt that rushing number for Colorado. So this gives you some indication. We talked last week about Iowa State. Here's one of the fundamental differences between the Iowa State odd stack and the K-State odd stack. 20-plus yard plays allowed. Iowa State doesn't roll the dice a lot. They don't blitz as much. They keep that shell pretty much intact and force you to nickel and dime your way down the field. K-State will sometimes crack that 3-man shell and take some chances with some blitz packages. They have allowed 32 plays of 20-plus yards. Iowa State's only allowed 17. K-State has allowed 10 plays of 30-plus yards, twice as many as Iowa State's 5. Iowa State's only allowed 1 play of 40-plus yards. Kansas State, 5 plays. That's kind of what's downstream of taking these chances when you blitz more. So when you look at their blitz numbers all year long, about 1/3 of the time, they're going to blitz you and you drop back to throw. They peaked against Tulane. They blitzed them 43% of the time, but they're not afraid to ratchet up some blitz packages, something to keep an eye on. Again, remember last week, Iowa State only blitzed Garrett 5 times and 35 dropbacks. When you blitz, you're rolling the dice, you're taking some chances. So when teams opposing you can make the most of those chances and hit big plays downfield, this is the result. For instance, K-State's scoring defense. Overall, they're 6th in the Big 12, allowing 21 points a game. At home in Manhattan, they're second in the Big 12, allowing 11. On the road in scoring defense, they're 14th in the Big 12, allowing 31 points per game. Again, in part because of the offenses they faced. Since they switched from that 4-man to the 3-man, they've been pretty productive. But again, one other thing to mention here, since Chris Kleiman took over in 2019, the Wildcats have held 37 of their 47 Big 12 opponents under their season scoring average at the time of the game. West Virginia's averaging 30 points. So we talked earlier about the streak of 28 points or more by K-State. Now we're talking about how they hold you under your average, and our average is 30. Last thing before I toss to you guys, and I think it speaks to the nature in which our offense has changed. We're starting to press a little more, and Garrett almost feels like he's playing like he feels like he needs to make more splash plays. Last year, he had the lowest. There's a turnover worthy play percentage. In other words, how many plays did you take a snap on? What percentage of them do you have a play that is turnover worthy, whether it's a turnover or not? Do you put the ball in harm's way? Last year, he had the lowest in the Big 12, 1.2% when he wasn't pressured, when he wasn't under duress, when he was clean. 1.2% last year of his plays were turnover worthy. Guys, this year it's 6.3, which is the highest in all of Power 4. So that is a sign of pressing. Settle down, run the offense. Remember, it's tough to get the splash plays against a disciplined defense like this. He only had 17 yards rushing the last time out 2 years ago in Morgantown, but a different type of challenge, even though it's a similar defensive construct than what was presented by Iowa State last week.
Man, here's what I'm going to say, too. With Avery being such a great rusher on the ground and being able to make plays on his feet, it really gives the defense a great kind of perspective when you're up against a guy who can scramble like Garrett. So it's going to be interesting how they really play that role if they dial that kind of pressure up. Obviously, it looks like they're going to dial up more than we saw last week. But just with that threat of him being able to scramble, because when he does get past the second level, he really does make some explosive plays.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I just want to see him playing with that confidence that we saw in Stillwater, right? Before the injury, after the injury. I mean, that is when he's at his best, when he's got that confidence, when he's making the throws, when he's using his legs, when, as you kind of mentioned there, Jed, it just doesn't feel like he's forcing it. Doesn't feel like he's trying to make a play. He's just out there making plays. And to be fair, too, you saw it in Stillwater. It kind of looked like we saw it at the start of the Iowa State game, right? And then, unfortunately, just weren't able to sustain it. Let's go do it for another 60 minutes again here. What do you say?
Yeah, it's worth mentioning, guys, that their top two corners are Jacob Parrish, number 10, and Keenan Garber, number 1. But Jacob Parrish last week against Colorado had to leave with a concussion. And he was one of the guys that they were monitoring this week when Chris Kleiman gave his presser. So something to keep an eye on is the status. I mean, you know how those things are once you go into protocol. There's no guarantee one way or the other, but it's worth keeping an eye on the status of Jacob Parrish, who is their top corner. Both those kids are physical kids, but yeah, I mean, weigh in on that because there might be some opportunities for a T-Ray or somebody on the perimeter, and then I'll hit some film notes, and Wes, I'll toss to you for some thoughts on their special teams.
Yeah, and Jed, I thought last week we were able to, it seemed like we made some good plays downfield with our wide receivers. I mean, kind of collectively, it seemed like we were getting the ball kind of spread around the entire horn there. Just missing on some of those long throws, right? Just, a little bit long, a little bit just not so there. Last week he had a couple. I don't know if they were like, I know one was kind of like a PI, but they didn't call it. And then the other one was, I don't know if it was a timing route and he threw it early or late, or the guy was supposed to be there and wasn't lined up correctly. It seemed like he was a little off there on really really only that's like 3 plays I could really remember from being at the game that I was really kind of just, obviously they dropped that one and then they ended up getting us for 2 more there. But sometimes I feel like, especially I'm trying to think of which one it was, but I felt like he got balled up and he almost kind of forced it. And that's where I feel like some of that natural, whatever instinct of his own, where he just kind of needs to just play ball. You know what I mean? I understand he wants to get the ball downfield. I get it. There's these, we want to get his passer rating up and all this stuff and develop and be better at that. But sometimes when you got a guy like him, you just got to let him make a play. And I know that's not always, coaches are always wanting quarterbacks to make plays with their arms over their legs, obviously, because of the risk of injury. But
it's harder to defend. If you can do both, it's just harder to defend. You know what I mean?
It is. I mean, you can throw a ball, faster than you can run. And I understand that. But it seems
that's
like
what I mean. And I mean, if you can do both,
if
you master one, you're going to be easier to defend than if you improve at the other. So, you know what I mean?
No. I get that. I'm just saying in situations where they seem like, hey, it's not there, make a play.
Yeah.
And Jed, like I said, look, I'm not a quarterback. I'm a fullback, right? Obviously, you would know better than I do. I played with a guy who made a lot of plays with his feet.
Couple, didn't he?
Huh?
He made a couple, didn't he?
He made a couple with his feet. And so, I don't want to compare, and there really is no comparison. They're two totally different guys. As much as people want to compare and do all that or whatever, they really are.
Yeah.
But just, hopefully this week, like I said, we just got to be consistent in our efforts to make the game happen. It was disappointing last week. I mean, Wes, I can't thank you enough for the seats. Cassie and I had a blast.
Good. Glad.
Yep, Jed. Sorry I didn't see a pregame. They kicked me off the field after that. I pulled a favor. Old Kyle hooked me up, and they got me on the field for the start of the game there. So I'm sorry I didn't see you pregame, but I only had a little.
I got a bear hug from Pat White, and I didn't even see you.
I know, dude. I feel bad. Hey, listen, to be honest with you too, everybody was like, Pat's here. I'm like, I haven't even gotten to see him yet. So, the first time I seen him when they had him on the Jumbotron there, and he was like walking in front of the team with his daughter there. So, you know what? I'm glad you got a hug from number 5.
Well,
at least
who doesn't want a hug from number 5? But when you mentioned the deep shot, like I remember the deep shot that we took. It was 6 inches off the T-ray where we tried to breach the shell of that 3 safety look. And we got slightly behind it, but it was just off. And what's funny is I was watching tape and I thought of that play because against Arizona, Noah Fafita had a similar opportunity in the game against K-State, and he squeezed the trigger instead of pulled it. And he had his receiver break open on a skinny post right behind the safety who cheated down. Similar, but he waited just a split hair too long. And so instead of throwing a 40-yard touchdown, he threw a pick because that corner had a chance to react. And I'm like, see, there are some cracks in the armor. When you're watching tape, it's not like they're completely bulletproof. So there's some things to think about. We talked about them mixing in the even front. We talked about them running some 2-man. Now, here's the thing with the pressures. I saw a lot of pressures on 3rd and long, especially the 6-man pressures. They'll dial it up and try and get after you on 3rd and long once they get you behind the sticks. But they're also chess players in the sense that Joe Klanderman won't do that every time. It seems like there's once or twice a game that once he gets you used to seeing 6-man pressures on 3rd and long, all of a sudden he drops 8. That's the kind of stuff Gibby used to do. He'd pressure you, and then drop 8, and get you off balance. So that's something that I see out of them too. They'll show a lot of cover too. In other words, they give you a too high look pre-snap, but then right before the snap, they roll the man free. And I saw them roll strong and I saw them roll weak. So that's going to impact your route combinations. It can impact some of your sight adjustments. It can obviously impact your read keys. So that's the type of stuff that when you're watching tape on them, Garrett and the quarterbacks are looking at right now and discussing. I tell you what, their backers jump out. Their inside backers jump out. They're both playmakers. That's something that stood out. I noticed though, Tulane was having some success running split zone against them, and they were doing it different ways. Like, for instance, they might pull the tight end and crack down the split zone, but then there were times I saw him go split backs, and they put the tight end as one of the sidecars, and he would cross the face and make the block on the split zone that way. And they popped a big one against K-State doing that. And sometimes what happens when you run split zone, without getting too technical, the split zone basically means that's when you see the tight end or a blocker from one side crack across the formation and hit the unblocked defensive end to the backside, and you're running zone inside of it. Well, sometimes what happens is the inside backers see that action taking place and they get tripped up crossing each other. And now, and they by alignment. Sometimes those inside backers are really tight side by side. And we do run that split zone in some of the ways that I was talking about Tulane doing it. So if we see some of that, I got to kind of wonder if we get an opportunity to cross those inside backers up, we'll see. But that's something I've seen teams have some success with them. And then I mentioned Keenan Garber, their other corner. I saw them in a zero call. It reminded me of what happened to us against Iowa State when we blew the call against that rip formation on the 60-yard touchdown. Well, they had a zero call on and a zero blitz. And this Keenan Garber kid, he didn't match off on the tight end, which was in a flex slot. Instead of matching off, he should have been manned up on him, but he wasn't. He blew the call. The rest of the defense is in cover zero and a zero blitz, bringing zero pressure. Well, Keenan Garber drops into deep third or quarters, one or the other. He was dropping deep as the deepest. Meanwhile, that tight end runs a deep crossing route, completely untouched, 20 yards wide open for a 30-yard touchdown. So they sometimes blow calls too. This just in, they're human on the back end. So that's something to keep an eye on. But these are just a couple of the things topically that I noticed in, my first run through watching some tape on both sides of the ball. So,
yeah, go ahead, Big O.
No, I like it, Jed.
Yeah, me too. I was just gonna say, you want me to sprinkle some special teams. Say that 5 times fast. Sprinkle some special teams. Sprinkle some special teams. Sprinkle some special teams. Sprinkle some special teams.
Some special teams. I like it.
Listen, I mean, from Bill Snyder era now onward, the special teams prowess of Kansas State continues. I mean, I would argue, at least in my lifetime, my 3 decades of life, it's been Kansas State and Virginia Tech that have probably been the most synonymous with special teams across the college football landscape. That's continued. They brought in Nate Kaiser, a guy that I'm familiar with, Jed, on the special team side of things this offseason, because he's a guy who spent 2 decades in the NFL as a special teams coach. I mean, he was with the Titans, the Jags, the Bucks. He was recently with the Commies, the Commanders most recently. He's been an NFL special teams guy forever. He's from Kansas. He's now back home working there for Kleiman and for the Wildcats.
Not from Kansas. I mean, at this point, I'm like,
everyone's from Kansas. What the heck is going on?
Him, right?
Everyone's from Kansas. But kicking for them is Chris Tennant. He's solid. He's only missed 2 kicks all year, both long kicks. He from let's see here. What was it? From inside 42 yards. He hasn't missed one all year. Like I said, only missed 2 all year. He's been perfect on extra points. They're getting, well over 40 yards net punt from Simon McClannon. Is it McClannon? I don't know how he pronounces his last name. Simon, Irish last name.
It's Irish.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
But again, this is Jed. You gave me the crazy statistic before we started recording this, so I don't want to take credit for this because everyone knows this is a Jed statistic. I would have said this and tried to claim it as my own, and Owen would have laughed and said, "Dude, you stole that from Jed. What are we doing here?" I know that. They haven't given up.
Kansas,
They haven't given up a kick return touchdown since 2013. Kansas State has.
Oh my gosh.
And Jed, how many have they scored since then?
13. 14. So they have scored on 14 kickoff returns
since they last gave one
since allowing their last kickoff return for a touchdown.
Insane.
Which, no, it wasn't Tavon Austin. Tavon Austin was 2012. But 2013 is the last. And you know what's funny about that? It's not funny. It's sad. I remember being in Manhattan. What year was it? It wasn't 13. It was 15. Being in Manhattan in 2015. And I was in Manhattan, Kansas in the Little Apple when my wife was on a Christmas shopping spree with her sister in the Big Apple in Manhattan, New York. Same night. But she had a much better night than I did because, of course, they returned a kickoff for a touchdown and beat us. So special teams, special teams, special teams. One of the things I do when I'm putting my notes together is the last section of my notes. I reserve a section that I call miscellaneous and special teams. And that's kind of a catch-all for anything that's interesting, miscellaneous about the matchup or about the special teams, the opponent. And obviously, when we play K-State, that's usually dominated by the special teams more so than the miscellaneous. And once again, that's the case. They always have in their game notes some version of this, and they have for so many years running. K-State is the nation's best in non-offensive touchdowns over the last 25-plus seasons, as it has scored 134 non-offensive touchdowns since 1999, 9 more than the next closest team, Alabama. K-State has recorded 3 non-offensive touchdowns this year, including a blocked punt for a touchdown and including a kick return for a touchdown. The Wildcats continue to lead the nation in total return TDs since 2005 with 62, which is 22 more than the next closest team, Alabama, with 40. So, yes, that continues to be a constant in the Little Apple. Special teams that can win games for that football team.
Well, and there's a big reason why that team has been solid for so many years. I mean, when you can be solid in all 3 phases of your football team, production speaks.
Absolutely.
Certainly does, and they
absolutely.
are. Man,
and you remember the quirky nature, guys?
For that.
You remember when they came to Morgantown 2 years ago? The quirkiest thing about that game, of course, there were 2 pick sixes in the first quarter. Each team had one. We had a big long touchdown to Sam James. It was 28-19 at the end of the first quarter. If I'm not mistaken, I think I remember us discussing this at the time. That might be the highest scoring first quarter in program history. It was just a bizarre game, a bizarre from the outset. So let's kind of try and avoid that. All right. Let's avoid giving up 28 points in the first quarter this time around. And let's see if we can jump out to the early lead, because these guys are a handful no matter what the circumstance or what the situation. But I think the biggest thing, you got to corral that run game, Owen. Now Owen's peeked out on us. Where'd he go? He vanished.
I think he might have just accidentally knocked himself off here, but that's okay. We got to get to a break before he's trying to jump back in here. We need to get to a break anyways, get our pick 'em. And we will do that now. But yes, I think that the best way to sum this all up, stat for you too, Jed, real quick. We haven't won a homecoming game since 2018. If we're going to break that streak, you're going to have to be buttoned up Saturday night against this team, because they are always buttoned up.
I miss Temple. I miss Temple. Yeah.
All right, we're going to take a break. There is our K-State preview. We will just wrap this up briefly on the other side with our weekly Big 12 Pick'em. You are in the gun.
There are better-known tractors in the world than Coyote. Ones with bigger names, longer histories, more popular hats, cute toy lines. But there's not a single tractor ever been built that's better equipped to do the dirty work. So we'll just focus on what really matters. Coyote, we dig dirt.
Now at Johnston Equipment, get 0% financing for 72 months, plus a free loader on select Coyote models in stock. Visit us on Route 33 between Weston and Buchanan.
All right, all that's left for this edition of ITG is to give our weekly pick'em. But before we give our picks for this week, week 8, Jed, a recap of how we did in week 7.
Yeah, let's find that while I'm talking about the fans. Can you guys look that up on the thread? I'll talk about what the fans did, all right? Because our thread is so deep at this point. Wow.
I'll find
we've
it.
been talking about
I'll
26
send it
things.
to you
Okay.
again here.
So meanwhile, here are what the viewers and or listeners did this week. You had John from Cross Lanes nail the passing offense with Colorado. You had Kevin. Listen to this, guys. I'll say Kevin for last. Nathan from Brewston Mills got the passing offense with Colorado. Eric from Ashton, West Virginia, got the passing offense with Colorado. There he is. Skylar's boy Brock from Wheeling got the passing offense, Colorado. My guy, my starting guard from high school, Chopper Evans. What a guy. Chopper Evans, guys, got the defense, Cincinnati, and the passing offense with Colorado. I'm not surprised. Chopper is one of the smartest dudes you've never met. Okay, now, Kevin from Harmony, North Carolina. Fellas, he went 3 for 4. He almost challenged our defending champion down under from Australia. He got BYU as the scoring offense, UCF as the rushing offense. Wait a minute. Did UCF hit that? And Colorado as the passing offense. Unless I'm off with the calculation here, that's what it looks like. But Kevin from Harmony, North Carolina, did a nice job last week. So there are how the listeners did last week. I have the total somewhere. Did you find it?
I just sent it to you again in the thread of the group chat. Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say, what was the rushing offense?
The rushing offense was yes.
Yeah. Our boy, Will, I shouldn't have doubted Will Gregory. Will Gregory helps us put this together. Friend of the program, Will Gregory from Belington, West Virginia, between Belington and Philippi, Barber County fella. But yeah, UCF finished number 1 with 196 yards. So here we go. Here's how we did last week. I picked Colorado versus K-State. Colorado did, in fact, throw for the most yards, 388 in a losing cause. So I get 5 points. Owen picked West Virginia versus Iowa State. Owen, we did run for 148, which got you on the board. That's 4th most in the Big 12. UCF led the way with 196. K-State 188. But Owen, you get 2 points. Wes, scoring defense. You picked BYU versus Arizona. They didn't have the fewest points allowed, but they did get on the board. They allowed 19, which was good for 3rd. You get 3 points. Cincinnati, by the way, allowed the fewest points, 13. Big win for the Bearcats over UCF. On down to Skylar in the scoring offense. Skylar picked, and I'm sure he had a reason for this. I thought it was a quirky pick when he sent it in. He picked Cincinnati to score the most points in the Big 12 versus UCF. Cincinnati didn't quite get on the board. They scored 19. They won, but they scored 19, which was 6th most in the Big 12. BYU led the way with 41 points, the 6-0 unbeaten Cougs of BYU. So that is how the viewers and listeners fared, and that is how we fared. Now, this week's picks will go fussily. I won last week, so I get the honor of blocking someone. Skylar beat me to the punch and sent his pick in before I could block somebody. So Skylar picks Texas Tech as his scoring offense in the Big 12 this week. So Skylar takes Texas Tech at home against Baylor. I think the Bears might have one last stand left in them. I just got a weird feeling about that game. But, Wes, I'm going to block Iowa State at home. Jack Trice under the lights against UCF. You can't take them as your scoring defense. So who are you going to take as your scoring defense?
In the battle of the Big 12 toilet bowl, I'm going to take the Kansas Jayhawks to bounce back and shut the door on the Houston Cougs. I know the Cougs have a new quarterback. I know they're coming off of a bye week, but I think Kansas has some pride. I don't think they're as bad as their record states. So give me Kansas to bounce back this week and limit what Houston's going to do, since I can't take the low-hanging fruit of the Cyclones.
What's funny about that? When I was watching that Chris kid play a couple weeks ago, when he replaced Donovan Smith, I kept thinking back to a buddy of mine that played for Coach Rado, and he was a free safety. He had actually Coach Rod's first all-conference player, free safety at Salem, Eric Allcar. His son, Chase Allcar, long story short, ended up on Rich's staff at Arizona as a student assistant, and then ended up on Terry Bowden's staff at UL Monroe. And he was familiar from his days at UL Monroe with this Chris kid when the Chris kid was at Louisiana. And my buddy told me, hey, that kid that Houston just got in the portal, if they ever let him get on the field, you better keep an eye on him. He is a talent. And that's the only reason I knew anything about this kid as I'm watching him carve up TCU. So that's my knowledge of the new starting quarterback, it appears, for the Houston Cougars. But Owen, who you leaning towards for the beer truck, the rushing offense?
Look at that smile. Look at that smile on his face.
I hate to do this to our boys, but they I guess they didn't really let me down all the way, but I'm going with Kansas State.
Look at this. Wow. Okay.
And you know what? Hey, I'm hoping this reverse psychology that I just used works this week. Okay.
We call this hedging your happiness, right? You hedge your happiness because you're either right and you win the pick'em, or you're wrong and the Mountaineers make you happy. So you hedge your happiness.
Yeah, that's a great description. I like it. Perfect description.
I like it. And that's a good way to wrap. Oh, go ahead. Oh, wait, yeah, you didn't. I was going to say, you still got a pick. Sorry.
Well, there's only 2 or 3 that I like to lean towards. And again, it usually involves one of these 2 teams from a matchup standpoint. Colorado's on the road at Arizona. If it was at home, I might not go this way, but I'm going to go on the road. Tough game, desperate game for Arizona after what they've been through. I think they're going to put up a good fight, and I think Colorado's going to have to keep on chucking it. So I'm going to go with Shedeur Sanders again.
Ooh.
Now, I don't know what the latest on Travis Hunter is, because what he did last week, the most impressive part of that was without his top 2 receivers, including Travis Hunter in the second half. So I don't know the status of those guys. I haven't looked yet this week, but I'm going to go with Colorado on the road in Tucson against the Wildcats.
It's a good pick.
Broke the most shorts.
And there you have it. As always, go to our Twitter page at In the Gun Podcast if you want to get involved with the pick'em every single week.
Do we have a recipe, Owen?
We do
for this.
We do.
Okay.
I am prepared, and I will sprinkle this one on you.
We have a new tradition we wanted for our preview episodes, previewing the game, getting you ready to eat as you watch the game. Owen, take the floor.
Yes, we're going to do just a classic. This is the first one we're doing, so I figured I'd pull out the easiest one. This is a smoked wings, all right, classic right here.
Love it.
Smoked wings classic, okay? Super simple. Get you some wings, right? Drums, wingettes, whatever you like. Need a smoker, obviously, right? You can do this, charcoal, whatever. I have an offset. I'd prefer offset, but electric, pellet, whatever you want to use, doesn't matter, right? 4 ingredients, okay? You're going to need butter, salt, pepper, and garlic, okay? 4 ingredients.
SPG,
baby, all the way, okay? You're going to get your wings. You're going to get your butter bath, okay? You're going to douse your wings in butter, right? You're going to soak them in butter. Okay. Doesn't really matter. It's really just kind of it's like a pre-glaze. All right. Liberal coating, okay, of SPG, and throw them on your smoker.
Real liberal. We're talking like Bernie Sanders liberal here. All right. Yeah, real liberal.
That's a dose.
We're talking Salt Bay liberal, okay? We're talking serious here. Okay, and you're gonna season your wings both sides. Don't be lazy and just do one side. You want seasoning all around the wing.
For the wings.
A nice good wing coat. All right, put them on your smoker, roughly 275 to 315, right? Kind of in that nice range. Don't dip below 275. You want them just hot and crispy. You're going to smoke for about roughly 40 minutes to 2 hours, roughly, right? And you'll pull them off. You'll redo a butter bath, right? Not the same butter because you've put raw chicken and all that, so you don't want to cross-contaminate, right? So you'll have a whole new butter glaze. And then you will just season lightly, at the end. Okay. And I'm telling you, they will be the juiciest, crispiest, smokiest, most delicious wings you've ever had for a tailgate.
Now I want some.
I was just gonna say I got to bring my smoker down to the Peach Lot now.
Oh,
How am I
really?
gonna work this out?
Well,
Really?
here's what I'm gonna say. I don't know if I'm gonna be there this weekend, Wes.
That's okay.
But
No, it's not okay. You're undefeated when he's there.
That's
but
just
I know, but I mean, I know. Last weekend I sent him a text. I said, "Man, I could really use your mojo right now."
Yeah.
And I was winning in
Wait, you
Vegas.
speak
I was
back
like,
in
"Yeah,
Vegas.
you could, baby."
But yeah, that's a plain and simple,
Good starting point.
good start point.
Great starting point.
Want just some good smoke to it. Keep it simple, right? Keep it simple. Especially with chicken, because chicken takes smoke really well. So it's got a great blend of smoke flavor. You got the richness of the butter. And then you got your salt, pepper, garlic, which is the holy trinity of seasonings.
Yeah,
So,
buddy.
Yep. And I would say I would
Comments.
recommend a kosher salt, like and like a 16 mesh black pepper, a restaurant grade black pepper.
Something a little coarse, right?
Yep, some a little bit coarse. Pick up some of that smoke.
Grinder?
Yep, garlic. Try to get granulated. Nothing huge. You don't want huge chunks. You could go that route, but generally it just ends up burning on the pit. So just go with like not so much a powder, but a granulated garlic, and there you have it. That's it. That's the Beer Truck's first edition, first tailgate bonanza.
Beer Truck
Okay, now
smoked wangs.
In the comments, please tell us how much you would pay for a Beer Truck tailgate cookbook. Because I'll tell you what, if the comments flow, it might happen. Yeah.
Or maybe a game day pop-up barbecue stand with the beer truck.
Oh,
Absolutely.
how about that? Yeah.
You do that.
Right there in the Peach Lot.
I can't promise that I'll have a smoker, but I will be right there in the Peach Lot. You guys know the ITG flag, the Grateful Dead WVU flag. Throughout the season, there's been a handful of you that have stopped by and said hello for games. I love it. I was not there, obviously, for the big tailgate day last week, but I will be there this week. And my wife is going to be with me. My wife only comes to 1 or 2 games a year. My wife's going to be with me on Saturday, and she doesn't believe that people come up to me and say hello and that they like the podcast. So please come up to me and say hello and that you like the podcast. And I can say nana nana boo boo to my wife. All right,
Hey, I got to throw a
there
shout out to Brandon Buster. Met him on the side. Met him during pregame. Brandon Buster. I met him. We were in line to the men's bathroom down there at on the field, and he said, "Hey, man, love your podcast. Love you and Wes, Jed. Great stuff. Keep it up." So shout out to
you, Brandon. Thank you, Brandon.
That's the bathroom that you always run into the other team's mascots in.
Yep,
that's the bathroom, the field bathroom. I've been in there next to the Syracuse Orange before years ago. Yeah, but so you got to get there early enough to go to the Peach Lot and visit Wes. And then give yourself plenty of time. At 5:30, you got to be with Philip Bowen, and then kickoff is at 7:30. Make a day of it.
And then about midnight, meet me in Sunnyside to burn a couch. All right, sounds good. Sounds like a game plan. That will do it for this edition of ITG. We'll see everybody at the Ball Yard on Saturday for our guy Skylar Callahan putting this whole thing together. The Beer Truck, the Barbecue King, the Mr. Everything, Big O, the Signal Caller, Jed Drenning. I'm Wes Schuler. The one thing we ask of you is to be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast. Take care, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. Phil Steele Friday still to come tomorrow to tee up the whole weekend of college football. You've been in the gun.
ITG.
The fun doesn't have to stop here.
Be sure to hit subscribe and never miss an episode.
If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback,
be sure to follow us on X at In the Gun Podcast.
Join us again next time.
Until then,
tell an ear to tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast.
This mission is over. It's over.